All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode here, Tuesday night on A Flawed Man of God. I am your host, Stuart Davis. I'm a deacon at a small church just outside of Richmond, Virginia. I'm not a pastor, not a biblical scholar, and I haven't been to seminary. I'm not trying to get you to join my church or donate to any special cause. I just want to talk about God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, talk about the Bible, talk about Christianity, and talk about a wide variety of different topics, issues, and current events, and give you my perspective on them. One that I think is reflective of an average Christian guy. Been a Christian all my life, 40 years, non denominational Protestant. I don't subscribe to any particular doctrine or denomination, but what I am doing is living in the Word each day, in and out, trying to do it better every day. Sometimes I'll get it right, many times I'll get it wrong, but no matter what, if I'm on here streaming, you're going to get my honest opinion and my honest perspective on whatever it is I'm talking about. So if you're new to Christianity or if you're looking at Christianity, um, and searching for something more, if you're looking to see if there's more to your life than just this existence here on earth, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here. Hopefully, you can get a very relaxed, layperson perspective and setting where you can find just a beginning to start your walk towards salvation. And if you are already a Christian and you just enjoy Christian topics and discussions, welcome as well. Glad to have you here. We run this very similar to a Wednesday night study group or a Sunday school. We want to hear your opinions and get your perspective. And that's why I encourage everyone, new, searching, or well established and smarter than me Christians, get in the chat. Give me your opinions. Let me know what you're thinking. Ask questions, whatever. The chat makes this show better. Chat makes it so better. It gives us more content. It gives us more to discuss. And I get to hear more than just my own self running my mouth. And you know what else makes this show better is guests. And tonight we have a recurring guest, a guest from before this show was as popular as it is today. And that is Dr. Vaughn Mancha. How are you doing today?
Doing fine, thank you.
Glad to have you here. Now, the doc here was on here about a year and a half ago. And he was talking about epigenetics. So if you go back and you want to learn more about what the good doctor here has to say about epigenetics and how it might explain some things in the Bible, especially if you're a old Earth Christian, and you're looking for the way that science can point you towards the faith. That's a episode I really encourage you to follow, and I put his contact, not his contact information, but his YouTube channel in the chat. He also, as a compendium kind of to this, what we're going to be discussing here tonight, wrote a long article about his thoughts and his background on Job and how his views changed as a young student. I'm going to share that link in the Discord. So if you're in the Discord and you want to read more about it, what did you say, 40 pages, Doc?
40 pages long. Yeah.
Okay. It's about 40 pages. So it's not a daunting read or anything, but it's like a glimpse into, his background and his thoughts on Job. Maybe hold off on reading that until after we're done covering it, and then you can get his thoughts. Now, Dr. Vaughn reached out to me a couple of months ago with a lot of his thoughts on things, and he said, "Hey, I've really got a lot of thoughts on Job. I'm really excited about the idea of maybe coming on your show and sharing them." And we discussed it back and forth, kind of him sharing what he was thinking, and I thought it was very compelling, and I thought it was very worthy of getting the attention that I'm giving it right now. So what he's going to do is he's got some slides. We're going to put them up here. For those of you who are not really familiar with Job or have never read it before, this might be a time to take notes or reference back as we read through, because what the doctor here is going to do is talk about certain touchstones in Job to really look at. These are the verses where you really want to be paying attention and looking a little bit deeper, and he's going to give us his thoughts on it. So, like I said, chat's here. They're going to ask questions. We're going to go through it, but I'm going to let Mr. Mancha drive tonight. So
Yeah, people will jump in and ask questions. Is that correct?
Yeah, can you see the chat on the side
Uh,
where folks are basically saying hi?
no, I don't, but that's okay.
Okay.
As long as I can hear them.
Okay, I can pop them up. We'll do Dresden here. He was the first guy in the chat. He came up just to make sure everybody knew he was first. Jab Slant, it was here. MR is in the chat. Nernath he has a question for the guest. I already know what the question is, so we'll start off with a very softball, unrelated question that he has for all of our guests. And
yeah, go ahead.
And he also says, I won't believe he's a doctor until he shows us his stethoscope.
I'm a retired doctor. I don't stethoscope anymore.
He hung it up.
Something medical.
Yeah. So he's hung it up. But his first question, this is a question we try to ask all the guests who come on, is are you familiar with Sabaton? Do you know what Sabaton is?
I have not heard that term.
Sabaton is a rock band, a hard rock band, let's call it. And they tailor their songs based on historical events, mostly battles or military figures. Like they did one about the Red Baron, and it's to me, I like it. And I don't know how your musical tastes land, Doc, but if you do like something a little bit harder than normal, it is definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, heavy metal came out when I was young.
Yeah, so I mean, and it's kind of in the heavy metal, I would think, unless Nernath wants to correct me, but I would think it would be more in the heavy metal. But it's not like thrash or something like something over the top that's going to blow your eardrums out. But it's hard, and it's talking about it's giving us a story basically, and it's based on historical events. So Alex Moore says, who is the guest? I just introduced him. This is Dr. Vaughn Mancha. He is going to be talking to us about his thoughts on the book of Job that we're going to be getting into. Now, Job, as I said, is a very highly anticipated book for this channel, for this chat, the community here. A lot of folks have been a lot of folks have been very anticipating us covering this and learning more about it. So, but like I said, I'm going to let you drive, Doc. And if I have any questions, I'll stop you. And if I see one in the chat, I will stop you as well.
Okay.
All right. So let's give us a little bit of background of yourself and lead into this.
Well, what started me on this was when I was in college, I was taking two classes at the same time, and one class, and I was the president of a biology club, which was for folks trying to get into medical school, et cetera. And I had this chemist speak to us, and I thought he was going to talk about chemistry. He came over and told this story about how he had bought an old church and renovated it for a house. And he said during the night, the spirit would appear at the end of his bed, but he couldn't make it out. It had a highlight to it, but it was dark in between. And then it would speak to him and tell him different things. Being a pretty strong Christian at the time, I decided to test the spirits. It says, I think it's in 1 John, that if you test a spirit, it cannot represent himself as from Christ. They simply can't do it. It breaks the rules. So I asked him, was this spirit from Christ? And he looked at me like a deer caught in the headlights. And he just kind of skirted away. And I knew at that time that spirit was a demon. And at the same time, I was taking a course from a humanities professor. And this guy was a third generation Harvard graduate and a big flaming atheist. I mean, he was everything he could do to cause the Christian in the class to fall. And he made us read Dr. Faustus' Girder, which is basically Satan and God having a betting match over this poor chemist by the name of Girder who wanted to know everything. And Satan lured him away and had him sell his soul to him just so he can know all this stuff. And I combined the two things, and I wound up writing a paper for the humanities professor. He did not realize that the book of Job was actually based on some of this stuff. And, he knew I was a strong Christian. So he winds up giving a strong Christian in his class a perfect score because that totally blew away his whole thesis.
Yeah,
I
you
went
mean
on,
you mean the book? His book was based on Job, right?
well, Goethe's was.
Yeah, Goethe's book. Okay,
Yeah, and Goethe didn't even know it himself. And keep in mind, Goethe was considered one of the smartest men that ever lived. So Goethe wrote this poem, not realizing that it was really based off the Book of Job. And because I exposed this to the professor, he was incredibly delighted with me. And, in fact, he stopped picking on the Christians in the class because of the fact that I stood up to him and showed him how wrong he was. And I went on it, and for 40 years, I just kind of kept this in the back of my mind. And then I finally started saying, I'm going to write this down. And so about 5 years ago, I started drafting it and adding to it. And now I've got a fairly finished product. I probably ought to make a book out of it. But I'm going to present basically some key slides, 16 slides of verses that if you'll catch these verses in particular, you'll really understand the book, because it's a remarkable book. It's not just what you used to think it was. Most pastors that teach this say it's a book about undeserved suffering for Job. That's true, but it's much greater than that. It's about a debate between God and Satan and whether God is right to condemn Satan or not. And I'll demonstrate that with these slides if you'd like to move forward to those slides.
Yeah.
And this is the first slide. And I went ahead and started off with this slide. This slide, if you recall, God presents to Satan and the fallen demons and everybody present to God. And God says, have you seen my servant Job? He's righteous. And Satan says, well, he's righteous because you hemmed him into it, implying basically that Job's not righteous. It's just God made him righteous by hemming him in. And then he goes through two horrible tests, and Job passes both those tests. And so Satan basically realizes, I can't win this thing unless I get his friends to act like useful idiots. Back in the 70s, I don't know if no one around here was back in the 70s, but in the 70s, we had people that were protesting the nuclear weapons and everything, and they were called the useful idiots by the Soviets because Soviets were getting these guys to go out and protest against their own government, and they didn't realize the Soviets were backing them up. They coined the term useful idiots. And so Satan basically uses Job's three friends as useful idiots. As you recall, the chemistry professor who told me about the spirit that passed before him, this is exactly like the spirit that passes before Eliphaz. Eliphaz is the senior member. Now, in this group of guys, the senior guy goes first, and then you go by order. So Eliphaz is the main dude. Everyone has to listen to him first. And he tells his story. He said, a spirit passed before my face. And he says his hair went up on the back of his neck. He said, I couldn't make him out. It was just a highline, just like that chemistry professor. And then he heard the words, can mankind be just before God? Can man be pure before his maker? Well, God told Lucifer that Job was just and that he was pure, right? But Lucifer is questioning that whole thing. And why is he questioning that? Because, and here's the punchline, he puts no trust even in his servants, and against his angels he charges error. That one sentence right there tells you the whole appeal that Lucifer and the fallen angels have. Lucifer falls and God condemns him for it. What can Lucifer say? The only thing he can say is, you didn't trust me, that you just caused me to have error serendipitously. I didn't even have free will. You made me the way I am because you are omniscient. And so this is Satan basically tying at the hip the angels and the man's future condemnation, that we don't really have a chance. We can't be pure before God, and he doesn't trust us. And and then Job says, why are you frightening me with dreams and terrifying by visions? Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? He's actually talking to God here. He's worn down and he's thinking, if this is really God, why is he using frightening dreams? Why doesn't he come out and tell me what I did wrong? And he says, why don't you pardon my iniquity and take away my sins? Job was offering sacrifices for a pardon at the very first part of the book. And he can't figure it out here that somehow God is not releasing him from his transgressions. He didn't realize that this was being done to him by Satan. But he was also being frightened with these dreams and terrified with these visions. He was thinking at first that this was God. He later on corrects himself. Then Job goes on to say, there is no umpire between us who may lay his hand upon us both. Let him remove his rod from me. Let me not dread of him terrifying me. Then I would speak and not fear him, but I'm not like that in myself. Job is the oldest book in the Bible, and he's actually letting us know that this is what the future Christ is going to be. He's going to be an umpire that can put his hands on both of us, and therefore we will not be terrified of him, because to present ourselves to God without the humanity, we would just shriek away. Okay, well, here's again, Eliphaz jumps back in. He says, what is man that he should be pure? Or he that is born of a woman that he should be righteous? This is again quoting the Spirit, right? He's saying, can man be just before God? Can man be pure before his maker? And then he ties it to the angels. So again, he requotes that passage. And this is the key thing that you have to watch for the requoting of that Job 4 passage, because that is Satan sliding the argument in there, and he's allowing the useful idiots to attack Job with it. Because if he can win, he can justify himself and the demons. So he says, what is man that he should be pure, or he that is born of a woman that he should be righteous? Behold, he puts no trust in his holy ones. That's the angels again. But look what he goes on to say next. And the heavens are not pure in his sight. How much less who is detestable and corrupt man who drinks iniquity like water? Not only does he say that man and angels are impure, but the universe is impure. In other words, we have an entropic universe, and it's just all wearing down. And this may be one of the things that Satan is critical of God about, that we live in an entropic universe. The angels don't live in that sort of a universe. Our universe wears down. 98% of all species have ever lived have gone extinct. We all wear and age and grow old and die. And that might be actually something that really bakes Satan's noodle. He might think that it's not fair for God to allow that sort of thing to happen. And Job goes on to say, oh, that my words were written, that they were inscribed in a book. And as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last day he will take his stand on the earth. This is talking about the second coming, and that's in Revelation 19, when he comes down to the earth and takes his stand, and he rescues Israel first off, and he destroys the beast and all the human beings that were with him. And then you have the goat, the tares, where he separates them away. And but he's prophesying basically. He said, "Oh, I wish this was going to be written," and it is. His words are written, and Job is the first book in the Bible. So his prophecy, in fact, came true.
I think if I remember correctly, I don't know if Job's actually the first book of the Bible, but it happens like in between Genesis. It's like happening in somewhere during Genesis, like in between.
They don't
Tower of Babel and maybe Abraham or something like that.
There's different opinions, but the larger opinions are that it goes back before and probably during the time of Abraham.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. It was around Abraham's time period.
Yeah. So, but if you think about it, though, at the very first chapter, it says there's nobody like him on the whole earth. He is that righteous. And Abraham may have been around, which Abraham had flaws, as you know.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
there's only a handful of guys. I would say Job is one, Daniel. I mean, you never see Daniel ever make a mistake. There's a few people like that, Joshua, who just absolutely nail it.
Joshua does a decent job. I think Joshua's only issue that it was that he didn't wipe out all of the
Yeah.
Canaanites, but Daniel's solid. Joseph is solid as well.
Well, Joseph did make mistakes, so he tried to work his way out of prison, and that fell apart.
Yeah.
But I would say that Daniel is the only guy who never made a misstep. Of course, he never had the suffering that Job had. Job made a misstep, but it's understandable considering what he was going through.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
in any event, so back to Eliphaz. Eliphaz is saying the same theme. Can a vigorous man be of use to God, or a wise man be useful to himself? And look what he says: Is there any pleasure to the Almighty if you're righteous, or profit if you make your ways perfect? I mean, look at how his message is degraded from what Satan gave him. At first, it was just, man can't be righteous for God. Now it's saying, well, even if you weren't righteous, God wouldn't care. In other words, God is so far above man that it really doesn't matter, does it? So just hope for the best, hold your tongue just right, and maybe God will take you in. And that's just totally ridiculous. But that's the sort of stuff that they got, that he's pushing. And you can imagine if you apply this to Satan, if he's basically saying, is there any pleasure of the Almighty if Satan was righteous, or profit if it made his way perfect? The same undermining would be occurring that he's made to that argument. So Satan is saying, I was righteous, but it didn't really matter to him. So now I keep pulling a lot of the stuff that Eliphaz did because the other guys just kind of bungle about. Eliphaz says dominion and all belong to him. That's correct. But then again, how can a man be righteous just before God, or how can how can he be clean who is born of woman? He's going back to Job 4 and what Lucifer told him. Even if the moon, if even the moon is not bright, you remember I said before he's calling the universe entropic. The moon is not bright, and the stars are not pure in his sight. That's the stars, but that's also the demons. And then he goes on, how much less man, that maggot, and the son of man, that worm. Now that kind of scares me right there because, Christ was constantly referred to as the son of man. And also he was the son of man that was crushed like a worm. And, I think that this may have something to do with that. He's taking a shot at him, basically. He doesn't realize that's what he's doing. But basically he's saying Christ as being the son of man is just a worm. He's a maggot. He can't do anything in that particular state. Now, I may be overstating that particular case, or he may just be referring to man. But this still is going off of what Lucifer in Job 4 told him. And then now this is a key passage. Job responds and says, what counsel have you given to one without wisdom? Remember that. What counsel have you given to one without wisdom? Because a couple passages over, God speaks and says, who is this who darkens counsel without knowledge? So God is saying the same thing that Job is saying. He's basically saying the same thing. These guys are supposedly counseling him, but they don't have any wisdom. And in the same way, God, when he appears later, says, who is this who's giving counsel without wisdom? He's not talking about Job alone. He's talking about the three friends. And what helpful insight have you abundantly provided? To whom have, and watch this, to whom have you uttered words, and whose spirit was expressed through you? Right? I mean, that goes right back. That goes right back to here. A spirit passed before my face. He said, puts no trust even in his servants. At first, Job is thinking that God is doing this. When you frighten me with dreams and terrify me by visions, and he's applying that to God. But then later on, he realizes that this spirit is not from God, but this is from some other spirit. He says, "To whom have you uttered words, and whose spirit was expressed through you?" Now that is really significant because there Satan has used them as useful idiots. He floated that one sentence that he doesn't have trust in his servants. He found error in them, And he's gotten them to argue his case in front of everybody because he can't come in and do it. He's already lost twice. He went through 2 different trials with Job, and Job, passed him with flying colors. So Satan has to do it a very subtle way by floating words into people's heads and get them to argue on his behalf. And then Job goes on to say, far be it from me that I should declare you right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity. I will hold fast to my righteousness. I will not let it go. My heart does not reproach any of my days. So Job knows that he's righteous and that these guys are doing the wrong thing. But the reason they're doing it, again, is because they don't think it really matters whether you're righteous. And what use of it is to be righteous? God will just pick you if he wants to. Now, the last guy that speaks is Elihu, and he's a young man. He has to wait until all these guys speak, and he goes into a 6-chapter diatribe. And he's saying things like, I'm perfect, but all he does is reiterate the things that they say. He said, indeed, God speaks once or twice, yet no one notices it. In a dream, in a vision of the night. He's talking about that passage, that vision. When sound sleep falls on men. Excuse me one second.
Sure. Regular.
Somehow my TV went off. I had it on pause. Okay, so Elihu, the young guy, said, while they slumber in their bed, that they might turn man aside from his conduct, this spirit. And he's basically saying Satan's message might turn him away from his spirit. You see the irony of that? And keep a man from pride. And the pride is that Job is saying, I'm righteous and I've performed sacrifices and I maintain my righteousness. And Satan is basically saying, no, you can't be righteous as a man. And then look what he says at the bottom. If there's an angel as mediator for him. Now he's implying that maybe an angel is mediating for him. And guess what? Guess what angel that is? Lucifer. Lucifer is mediating for Job. I mean, isn't the irony is just unbelievable. 1 out of 1,000 to remind a man what's right for him. So basically he's saying, Job, you're lucky. You're 1 out of 1,000. This mediator angel is giving you this message and you're ignoring it, basically. He goes on to say, so Elihu, stage left, he's clueless. He's basically saying the same things over again.
Well, he's the kid, right?
He's the kid.
And he's listened. So,
well, you know what? A lot of pastors come along and they'll say Elihu really wasn't bad and he really was trying to tell Job some good stuff. And no, he really wasn't. He was just as bad as the other guys. He really was.
It's the road to hell being paved with good intentions, right? Yeah. Elihu, he sees. So if you guys who are not familiar with Job is a very long book compared to what we've covered, covering basically a singular event, and it's a lot of people talking. It's a lot of talking, and it's Job, and he's there with his 3 friends, and kind of this other guy who kind of hangs out with them, and that's Elihu. He's kind of like the young kid. I don't know if he's a servant or like
he's
protege.
The young one.
Yeah,
Eliphaz is the oldest, so he speaks first. Then I forgot the other 2, and then Elihu speaks last.
Elihu's kind of like not. He's like I don't know. He's not part of that group of 4 that's Job and his friends, but he's kind of like hanging on, and he's a kid that they enjoyed his company and whatnot. But for whatever reason, he's there. And then finally, he's basically heard all these people talk back and forth, because one friend will talk to Job and Job will give him his response. And another friend will talk and give his piece and Job will respond. And, goes back. And finally, Elihu is just like, guys, you guys are just running your mouth. Let me try to explain what it is, and he gives his opinion, which like Doc says is it's just a rehashing of a lot of other stuff. And it's also kind of the pride of youth. Right, he's thinking that he knows more than these older folks, and then he can set things correctly. And that's what I've always viewed Elihu as. It's kind of he's correct. A prideful youth. He just doesn't know better.
Yeah, and in fact, really, he's so far off the mark that God doesn't even address him. God just says, "Okay, you and your friends, you're going to offer sacrifices, and Job will take care of you." But Elihu, he doesn't even talk about. So that kind of tells you, like, everyone's just looking at him and looking away. So anyway, in Job 38, the chapter 38 of Job is my favorite chapter in the book of the Bible. There are so many scientific lessons that are in it. It's unbelievable.
It is. It's very good.
I mean, okay, for instance, did you know that the earth started as a cornerstone, as a rock? And that's what we always felt it did. Astronomers thought that, gas would form in a disk and that little bits would get together and a rock would form and then a bigger rock, right? We only just have discovered that is the case with these large telescopes down in the South America. They were able to put the images of 66 radio telescopes together and bring these brilliant images of that process happening. And it's exactly what the book of Job said. There is a cornerstone to the beginning of the earth, which is astounding. And he goes on to say that I wrapped you in deep darkness. And when you look at Venus, it's covered with heavy gases. The Earth was covered in heavy gases, but a large planet hit us and pulled those gases off and formed the moon. The moon is not really a moon; it's a coplanet. But so we had those gases around, and once those gases came off, then you could see the sun, and that might be, in fact, what Genesis 1 is talking about. Let there be light, because initially it was darkness, and the Holy Spirit was on the face of the dark, and then suddenly it was light. Also, it talks about water is born into ice, and it says it seals up the deep. If H2O, the hydrogen bonds on water, didn't bend 4 degrees exactly at freezing temperature, ice would form on the top of the ocean and it would float to the bottom and kill all the living sea stuff, and we would all die. We couldn't have life. We wouldn't have anything to live on. So it's an anthropic principle, we call. There's just thing after thing. Okay, it was talking about, can you bind the Pleiades, which is a constellation of stars? Only in the last 50 years, they've come to realize that those stars are bound gravitationally. And he said, can you loosen the cords of Orion? Well, Orion is gravitationally bound, but the belt, which is made up of 3 stars, is floating apart. It's not gravitationally bound. It's loosened. How in the world did they know that? And yet we just know that in the last 50 years. Thing after thing. Oh, it talks about light. Can you take light on its way so that it knows its place? Light has physicality and it moves. We didn't know that until the late 1800s that was the case. And yet here it is talking about it, that God tells Job these things. So it's just an astonishing book. But for our purposes, God starts off by saying, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now, Job takes partial responsibility for that, but
Who's this idiot talking? It's basically God goes, what is this foolishness going on?
Yeah, it is. But he's also talking at the guys that are telling Job stuff. I've got these knuckleheads telling my guy who's darkening my counsel, Job, with words without knowledge, you guys. Okay. He said now, and then he says to Job, gird up your loins like a man. That's basically saying shake it off, right? You're a man, shake it off, and I'm going to ask you some questions and you can tell me the answers. And Job says, I'm insignificant. What can I say to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. He's being humble. He doesn't say, well, you just did all this stuff to me. Why'd you do all this stuff? Again, Job, the next chapter, speaking to Lucifer through Job. Now, this is really amazing. Will you really annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you might be justified? That goes back to that Job chapter 4, that he found, he blamed his angels. He found error in them. And they're going to say, so you're going to condemn me that you might be justified? That sentence there in Job 39 and in Job 4 tells you the whole debate that Satan has before God, basically. But then look what he says. Do you have an arm like God? The arm like God is Christ. Christ is the arm of God. He says, can you thunder with a voice like his? And he's asking Satan this, not Job, really. He said, then I will confess to you that your own right hand can save you. You know that it must fry Satan's noodle, that he can't even maintain his own existence, that God has to maintain his existence. Here he is saying, can you even maintain your own existence? Can you make justice? If you can maintain your own existence, and then you can thunder with a voice like his, then I'll confess to you that your own right hand can save you. Satan's trying to be saved. He's saying you can do it on your own if you can maintain yourself, and he can't. So he's really smacking it. It's a smackdown, really. I mean,
Yeah.
this is not Job.
No, one of the things Nernath basically brings up is he goes, I mean, Job did basically say, what good is it to be good if you suffer for it? It is better for man not to be born. Job said that.
Well,
I mean, he's in
that's
despair.
true. Yeah, he said that on a couple different occasions, and that was after his second set of tests, and that was kind of a justifiable thing. That he felt sorry for himself for a little while, but he dusted himself up and got going. That's that phrase there is kind of an interesting phrase, because he said, I wish that I wish that I had died in the womb and gone from the womb to the tomb, and I would have been as though I never existed," which kind of has some interesting connotations to that. He says in chapter 3, I wish that Leviathan had eaten the day that it was conceived. So he wished that he would have been not conceived. He said, oh, that my mother's knees would have received me, and then I died, then I would be with the kings of the earth. So in other words, either not be conceived, die right after birth, or die in the womb, and then I would be as though I'd never been. So those are the three options he was wishing for. That's how bad it was. Let's go over here. Okay, so now what's interesting in Job 41 is God is describing Lucifer, because where has Lucifer been all these chapters, right? Lucifer is the one that's really causing this, and they don't really realize it. So he brings in Lucifer and he calls him Leviathan. This is also in Isaiah that he's called Leviathan. And look what he says here. Can you draw out Leviathan with the fish hook, or press down his tongue with the cord? Now, Leviathan also had a connotation of being like a crocodile. And if a crocodile bites a fish hook and starts rapping, the cord will go around his mouth so he can't do anything. So, when God asked Satan in the very first chapter, have you considered Job? It was like it was over. Once he bid on it, the whole argument was over, because God just knew so many moves ahead, and so. But look what he says. Okay, he's tied himself up in his argument. He's destroyed his argument that God is unfair because he allowed them the free will to reject him. He said, "Will he make supplications with you at this point? We're under grace. We can believe and get saved even though we're separated." But angels are not under grace, because they can make a decision once and for all. And he explains it here. He won't make supplications. He's not going to change his mind. Or will he speak to you with soft words? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? Lucifer will never return to be a servant for him. And look at what he says down below here. And this is to Job. Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Behold, your expectation is false. You will not be laid low even at the sight of him. I've been in some massive alligator farms in Florida, and they'll tie up the nose of it, and they'll put their hand on the top of it. And he's basically saying, I've tied his nose up. Here, come here, lay your hand on him, because you have defeated him. I mean, has God ever said that to anybody about defeating Lucifer as a serpent, to lay your hand on him? I mean, that's high honor right there, to say you have defeated him, put your hand on him. So God continues to describe Lucifer. He said his heart is hard as a stone, even his heart as a millstone. Nothing on earth is like it, nothing made without fear. He looks on everything that is high. He is the king over all the sons of pride. Who are the sons of pride here? They are the ones that followed him. They were all proud, and he's their king. And he tried to get them off with that gambit, where he used Job 4 and appearing as a spirit to say God unfairly just did this to us. But Job, by holding to his righteousness, disproved him completely. So at the end, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, "My wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends." Remember, Elihu's not even in here because you've
Yeah.
not spoken what is right about my servant as Job has. Now, therefore, take for yourselves 7 bulls and 7 rams, the holy number, and go to my servant Job and offer a burnt offering for yourselves. Now, remember, this is what Job was doing. He was offering sacrifices. It's by sacrificing that we get our fellowship back with God, and we also attain our salvation. We recognize Christ as the sacrifice. And so he's telling them to get into the sacrificial system that Job used to maintain his righteousness. And my servant Job will pray for you. Job is basically being considered as one of the first priests, if not the first priest in the Bible. For I will accept him so that I may not do according to your folly. And the folly was basically being used by Satan, because you have not spoken to me what is right, as my servant Job has. So that's a pretty much a wrap on it. If you follow these particular verses, then all the other stuff just kind of fits in between it, because there's a lot of stuff that is kind of misdirection that doesn't seem to have any relevance to which way it's going. But you got to laser beam that chapter 4 and see how that keeps repeating itself. And keep in mind that this whole thing is not just Job going through suffering, but it's Satan trying to get off the hook for his sin when he claims we had no choice in it. You just found error in us. Um, so going back to this particular verse, this is the verse that does it all. Job 14:7. A spirit passed before my face. Can mankind be just before God? He's declaring that we cannot be righteous, and that is incorrect. We can be righteous, not because of ourselves, but because we can have imputed righteousness, and that's through the sacrificial offering. Can mankind be pure for his maker? Yes, he can, because of sacrificial offerings. Today, how do we do it? We do it as priests. We do it by 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That's how we maintain our righteousness before God. And then we grow in his word. And then, of course, Satan says he puts no trust even in his servants, and against his angels he charges error serendipitously. So
I think that might be a huge deception of Lucifer. Of course, we don't. And I was going back and doing the time when I was looking at the timeline. So Job happens a little bit before Abraham. He's there basically in between Noah and Abraham is when Job is thought to come about, which makes sense. Job is an exceedingly wealthy man if you look at what his possessions were at the time period. I mean, he is insanely rich.
When that's kind of one of the unusual things, because it's unusual to find somebody very wealthy and very righteous. But
Right.
You're talking about the Abraham thing. If you look at the very last chapter, it says that he lives another 150 years. And you can go by the ages of these people to realize that he was after Shem. And and Abraham lived about 250 years. And Noah only lived, Moses lived about 120. So you can tell where they lived as to when they existed.
Yeah, and the fact that he puts no trusts even in his servants, he puts an immense amount of trust even in the Old Testament. Now, we don't really have much precedent here in Job except for Noah, right? Or he put trust in Adam. Just because we let him down doesn't mean that he doesn't trust us. He trusted Adam and Eve in the Bible or in the Garden of Eden and said, "Hey, you guys, here's a paradise I've made for you. Just got one rule: don't do this."
Yeah.
And he basically it seems like he leaves them kind of to their own devices. He spends some times with them, but there seems to be some times where they're alone. And that's a measure of trust. I've let you guys have your own have your own privacy or existence, and I'm not around you all the time. Or with Noah, hey Noah, I'm going to ruin the world. I need you to build a boat. I'm going to command you to do it. I'm going to trust that you're going to do what I say. Then later on, we're going to get to he trusts them. He makes a covenant with Abraham, and that falls through, and then comes kind of full circle with Moses. We go through Abraham's descendants. We get to um, the fulfillment of what God prophesizes with Moses, leading them out of slavery and leading them towards a promised land. And he brings that covenant. He puts that, they're carrying around the ark. And then in the New Testament, we see him put trust in people like Peter or Paul, fallible folks who have done bad things and would continue to slip up from time to time. God continually puts trust in us, and I think that's a real critical error. I think in Calvinism, and I think that's where we were going to go. How you think Job really disproves some tenets of in the Calvinist lack of free will.
Well, this is one of the verses right here. What is man that he should be pure, or born of a woman that he should be righteous? Calvinism is based upon um, St. Augustus, and St. Augustus was basically holding to the Greek philosophy of Gnosticism. Gnosticism basically said that the body is just totally reprobate and it can never be able to even know what's right for it. So it simply can't reach salvation. And if you look at the Mennonites and people like that, they won't even have sex. The body is so bad, And so, I mean, it's kind of really, I mean, they may have a few kids, but
only for procreation. Only for procreation.
Yeah. So basically, though, they look at this as though you're just predestined. Now you're talking about trust. There's no indication in the Bible that God did not trust his angels on any level. His angels were doing high level stuff, and he trusted them completely. Satan was the covering cherub in the garden before before Adam was there, and he also walked upon the fiery mountain of God in heaven. But then that's when he got proud and he was thrown from the fiery mountain, although he was still able to trudge around in the garden. But he was, in fact, in charge of the garden. I'm not sure about, I mentioned this into a previous lecture, but, when Adam and Eve were thrown out of the garden, God put a cherubim next to the tree of life so that he couldn't go back and live indefinitely. And now you might ask, why not just use a regular angel? I mean, cherubim is hugely powerful. Satan's a cherubim, and this cherubim had a sword that turned in every direction. I mean, that thing was like a lightsaber. And
Kylo Ren's lightsaber.
Yeah, no, I mean, really, I mean. What that meant was that Satan might have taken Adam back in there and tried to keep people living in a state of sin indefinitely. And this is what prohibited that. So that's the only reason I can think of doing that. So, but nevertheless, Satan is the only one who was given all this superpowers and responsibilities, and he discarded them. I would say probably the next greatest power would go to Michael, who's the prince of Israel, and he protects Israel, and Gabriel. But there's also this one badass in First Thessalonians 4 that comes back with Christ during the harpazo, or the rapture, and he gives a shout and he blows the horn. And I mean, this guy must be a Navy SEAL general, because he's the only thing that comes back with him. I mean, can you imagine? This is a bad dude here. I mean, you've got, well, number one, Jesus doesn't need anyone to help him. But the one guy he picks is a real badass.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's like, imagine being who Jesus would pick to do anything with.
Yeah,
right?
He picked the biggest guy, wouldn't he? Yeah. I mean, that guy was so tough that any of the other angels that tried to interfere with him get smattered. So And that's, by the way, that's, I'm a pre-trib guy myself, and I always give my post-trib brothers a hard one about that. I said, well, tell me how many of the seven trumpets are blown by archangels, and they're none. I said, therefore, it can't be the seventh trumpet, because the archangel that's blowing it is blowing it at the rapture. So I give him a little bit of a hard time about that.
Nernath says Daniel's angel in Daniel 7 holding his own wrestling with Lucifer, as I recall. Michael came in to assist to get him free, though.
Well, that is a cool passage. Why would it be? It's not like he's doing a wrestling match per se. I would say it's three-dimensional chess that's on a quadrillion dimensions. In other words, they're determining what's going to happen with each nation after them, because all these things, you've got the different nations that are being revealed by Daniel, and he's debating with the next one, the king of Persia, right? And they're arguing it out. And I have this feeling that they're saying, well, if you do this, I get to do this. If you do this, and I'll get to do that. And it's just an unfolding of history, that they're on such a level that they can look at things as an overall global scope and not so sequential as we do. And that's what I'm really interested in, that passage and what that means and the implications for it. But it's got to mean some significant things going on.
Getting back to Job, and the idea of free will, or the lack of free will. We do things as God. We do what God wants us to do. And I've got a couple of Calvinists who are going to come on to the show eventually, in the next few weeks, hopefully, to kind of really describe their their doctrine on theology and their viewpoint on things, because it really, as somebody who really is myself, very much God gave us an immense amount of free will. I think it's a gift that he gave us, not that he doesn't have the power to take it away, but the fact that he has given this to us. It makes me look at the other side of it. Man, it's a very, very depressing, outlook on things. But
do you ever listen to William Lane Craig?
Mm-mm.
William Lane Craig is a great philosopher and theologian. And if you go on YouTube and look up Romans 9 with William Lane Craig, he gives a great explanation, because Romans 9 is the ground zero for Calvinism. They believe that it explains everything, right? And
yeah. And I'm like, okay, I get that you guys are getting this out of there, but it doesn't really fall into the consistency with the rest of the Bible. Because, if we take the approach that the Bible is, the God is consistent, and the world is consistent, even though man is consistently bad. It seems to be consistently.
See, there's a lot of things that you got to understand about Romans 9. For instance, it's not written for Calvinists. It's written for the Jewish people. And the Jewish people thought that they were predestined to go to heaven because of their relationship to Moses. And God forbid that anything otherwise could happen. So it really didn't matter what they believed or anything else, as long as they were connected to Moses. They were.
A lot of them still think that.
Well, and the Calvinists believe the same thing. God has secretly picked them over these other people. And so they insert themselves and basically are replacement theologians, that they think that they're in the place of Israel at this point. And then the first analogy he says, Esau I loved, and Jacob I loved, and Esau I hated. They jump on that like, well, that proves it right there, because you just serendipitously picked one and not the other. The problem is Jacob was not to receive the birthright. It was Esau that was supposed to receive the birthright. And Isaiah got incredibly pissed off when they tricked him, because he was blind, and his mother put hair on his arm so that he stole his birthright, basically. And this is God's way of saying, well, I gave it to the other guy because I can if I want to. But as it turns out, he was a believer, and Esau wasn't.
Well, and that's what I came, because we did cover that part already, obviously in our readings, because we're here in Job, and that happens in Genesis. But when you look at Jacob versus Esau, Esau's not an unlikable guy. He seems like a man's man, but what does he do? He doesn't obey when he talks about who he was going to marry. God specifically said,
Yeah.
I don't
He
want you to
marries some
marry.
Gentile ladies, and they were
Yeah,
all
don't marry
idiots.
the Hittite women. And he goes out and marries 2 Hittite women against his parents' directive, right? They tell him not to. And it seems like he's nice, he's an affable guy, but he's not somebody who's going to listen when he disagrees with it. Whereas Jacob, who is kind of shifty, he's not the most honest guy in some
No,
of
he's
his
very
dealings,
shifty.
but when God tells him to do something, he always listens. He always does it. And that's the thing. God's going to say, look, Jacob I love because we can go to, what do I point everybody to? I point him to Samuel talking to Saul. What does God want more? Does he want honor or does he want obedience? He wants obedience. And that's what Jacob provides for him,
Yeah.
obedience. And that is why God loves Jacob and hated Esau, because Esau didn't listen. Esau would not put his faith and just listen to what God would say because he wanted to do his own thing. The
But
same thing with
the
this.
other part though to Romans 9, and this is the one thing that Calvinists really latch onto. And God says, look, if I want to do something, I can. I can pick whoever the heck I want to. And that's correct. But that's not what he does. If you look at the end of the chapter 9, he picks the ones that believe in him.
Yeah.
But he has to shake the Jews loose of their thinking that I'm just related to Moses. And he says, look, I'll change it just like I changed out Esau and Jacob. I switched the deal on them. This one was first, just like you think you're first. Esau was first, but no, I picked Jacob instead. That's an
Yep.
important message that they do not get. And then he goes on to say the ones that believe are the ones that are it. And they somehow think that he's just serendipitously picking one and not the other. And I would say the next most important thing when dealing with Calvinism is Romans 9, when it says, those who he foreknew, he also predestined. It doesn't say those who he predestined, he also foreknew. Foreknowledge is part of God's knowledge. First of all, God is omnipotent.
Yeah. The
Omniscient.
omnipotent, omniscient, and
He,
omnipresent.
he knows all the different possibilities. However, foreknowledge deals with the one reality. And so God, when he looked at you through all time, because it took a universe and planets and all the right things, your mom meeting your father, for you to make a decision of a free will decision in him. And when he saw that in the past, that you were going to have free will, he said, well, you'll never get to that spot unless I predestine you, which means make the plan and all the other things. So he basically sees what we would do, but then he goes and makes all the stuff so we can do it.
Yeah.
But it's first that we have foreknowledge, not that we're predestined.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. And again, I'm not a scholar, and I can't run circles around some of these guys because, again, some of the folks I know who are the most studious about Scripture and understanding are Reformed Christians, and I will never take that away from them. They try their best to study it. I just come up with different conclusions, but they always come up with, you know, but God, you're limiting God's power by saying that you have free will. I have free will because God gave it
God's
to me,
power.
not
Yeah.
because I'm more powerful than God or I believe I'm more powerful than
Yeah.
God. That's not
Well,
what
okay.
I'm thinking.
For grins, I challenge them. How many times in the Bible do you find the word believe or faith? There's over 300 occurrences in the Bible. Why would God tell you to believe or have faith if there was really no point to it?
Well,
So
here's the real question. If Calvinism is true, explain Job. Job
yeah,
doesn't make any sense without it because
right,
why would Satan challenge God? Because Satan obviously knows,
yeah,
right? He's privy to a lot of that stuff.
yeah. Well,
Satan
he's
obviously
making a
knows,
statement. Yeah, there's the statement right there. Basically, as a Calvinist would say, he puts no trust even in his servants. That's what Calvinists would say.
or not even that. Satan doesn't even make this bet with God if he knows that God has power over these folks because he knows it's a non-starter, right?
Yeah,
He knows that if I can make this bet, but God can just change everything because he has total he has total control and he won't and he will violate it whenever he wants to.
Well,
Um,
he knows that he'll get waxed because he's already
yeah,
gotten waxed twice.
and
So he's going to get his friends to do the argument for him. So and basically it's a Calvinist verse right there. Can mankind be just before God? And the Calvinist will say no, he cannot. And that's because we don't have free will. We can never be pure. God has to make us pure. That's true on a certain level, but he makes us pure through our free will.
yeah,
So
I just don't see how Job is canon if you believe that there's no free will,
well, I
or
would
that or
say,
very limited free will.
yeah, I would say the thing to do is to go back through the Gnostic writers, type in Calvin Gnosticism, and you'll find all these references to the Gnostic writers. And then you'll see that this all channels through St. Augustine. And then John Calvin was a total worshiper of St. Augustine, and he picked up all his stuff. And St. Augustine was a big time Gnostic. He denied it for a while, but he really went back to it at the end of his life, and that's where it all goes. Gnosticism, St. Augustus, Calvin, and then now Calvin was not a 5-point hyper Calvinist. Beza, one of his students, took it further. So, but once you understand that, but otherwise, it's like I don't know. It's trying to like arguing paint off the wall. These guys are, there's 2 chapters in the Bible they realize, and that's John 5 and Romans 9. The rest of the Bible doesn't really make
Well, I
sense.
mean, that's interesting. I don't know much about Augustine other than, but one thing is I do know is that a lot of Catholics are fans
No.
of Augustine. I mean, that's why he's a saint, right?
Well,
And
he's a
they
major
they are
mover.
definitely anti-Calvinist. The Catholics are.
Yeah. Well, but nevertheless, he's Augustine was a wrote a great deal, but he did not have the background educationally in the languages.
Hmm.
So, and also the biggest Calvinist that's ever lived is John Spurgeon, Charles Spurgeon. He didn't have any background in it either, and um, so it's just I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I really it unraveled a lot of that, and you can just Google it. Gnosticism and Augustine and Calvinism, and you'll read a lot of stuff from these old Gnostics, and you'll see where this stuff comes from. And you also understand why John, the Apostle John, fought Gnosticism so much. One of the things he said about Christ when he was on the cross was when the guy puts a spear in him, blood and water came out. He specifically said that to point to the physicality of Christ. The Gnostics thought Christ was not physical, that he was a spiritual being, and the flesh is so bad Christ would never be flesh. Their argument seems to make sense, but it's a Greek philosophical argument, and
Yeah, I don't know how that really matches up with Scripture.
it doesn't.
Becoming
They
man,
replace
being
it.
crucified, resurrecting, all that stuff.
No, no, they deny all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, John starts the book of John. We held him with our hands, and they're, he's physical, he's real, he's touchable, and so that's where all that comes from. And Gnosticism was a huge problem in the early church, and I hate to say it, it's still a huge problem with the Reform movement. They don't know that. They really don't even know where their stuff comes from.
Yeah.
So
Like I said, I don't know enough about it, and that's one of the reasons why I want to bring some on, because there are some, like I said, some very righteous and very good Calvinists out there that I think are better Christians than I am, at least at least how I observe them, to come out and guys who get it, who are smarter than me, to come out and get it. I disagree with what they're saying, and why I disagree with it is what I'm seeing in Scripture, and it feels like to me the consistency of the Scripture really points. There's moments where it seems that God will intervene, like with Pharaoh during right before the Exodus. God hardened his heart,
well,
So there's
yeah,
something to
but
be like that. Yeah, maybe, but
no, wait a minute on that. If you look at the times, it says harden his heart. Half of the
mhm,
time, Pharaoh hardened his heart, and half the time it said that God hardened his heart. how can they both be? In other
At the
words,
same time, or
no, at different times. It would
no?
say Pharaoh hardened his heart, and then it'd say God hardened his heart. And I would say the explanation to that is by basically God hardening his heart is him letting him live longer to still rebel against him. And he's maintaining his body. God is maintaining us all, right? When we make bad decisions, God can say, I'm allowing you to make that bad decision. I'm hardening your heart. And I think that that's what it's meant by that.
It
Because
might be, but
yeah,
even if it doesn't, I mean, again, we're talking about, God putting things into motion to honor his covenant, honor his promise and everything. And
but,
we're talking about
well,
somebody who is not turning to Christ.
no,
This
but
is not.
then see what you're saying though is you're making him an author of sin, which could never be. Because when he hardens his heart, he's being sinful against God. If you're saying, well, that means that God is making him sinful, I would have to disagree with that. So the only way I can explain it is what I described before. Otherwise, he's the author of sin. And that may be a false dichotomy, but you see my point.
I don't know. Like, and yeah, like to me, a lot of the Calvinist the free will versus not free will kind of is so meta that it's not. We can disagree on this, and maybe somebody's right, maybe somebody's wrong on it, or somebody is right and somebody probably is wrong on it.
Are both
But
people
here's the
wrong?
thing: if I'm a Calvinist, I'm still living my life like I've got free will. I'm still making conscious
That's right.
choices. If
Yeah.
if Calvinism is true, okay, well then I guess it is. I'm still going to live. That doesn't. If Calvinism is true, it doesn't change how I'm going to live my life, right? I'm still going to wake up the next day. I'm still going to
The
choose
whole thing's
whether.
so silly. You can sit there and talk to a Calvinist guy and say, okay, you don't have the free will to talk to me. So you're just going to sit there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's preposterous. If they say something, say, did you say that your free will or God made you say it? I mean, you can see where that sort of thought can go. It's just unwieldy. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I was a part of a Facebook group where everyone's putting memes and things, and I must have collected 100
Oh,
good memes.
Calvinist memes are
Yeah, I mean
hilarious.
they're hilarious. Anyway, one of them had Darth Vader, and he's in his cage, or in his seat or whatever, and this guy's telling him, he said, my Lord, the Calvinists are quoting a lot of scriptures, and he said, release John 3:16. So,
Yeah.
which it always just destroys them.
Well, one of the guys in the chat, I think he's a former Calvinist, if I remember correctly, Veritax, he said the problem with suggesting that man having free will robs God, but his power belies the facts that if God wanted to, he didn't have to permit what happened in the garden. He didn't have to set that up. A lot of people don't put a lot of thought into the creation story, but at the crux of it was we were supposed to be beings that could appreciate God and glorify him of our own free will. If you believe the sovereignty that some Calvinists have preached, then you end up with a situation where we are robots programmed to praise God, and like that may seem and that may seem cool for about 5 minutes. But after that, you realize creating us as beings that have similarities to God built into his image with the ability to reason and come to the conclusion that God is also worthy is better.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. We'd be robots.
Yeah, and that's, I think,
And he would. The other thing, why would he die on the cross for a robot? We don't have any free will. He just
what is the need? And like I said, these are questions I have that and you've got to ask you've got to ask a reformed person who is
the thing
open
that kind of
to discussion, because a lot of their people, a lot of, and I'm not saying that they're the only ones, because you can talk to the bros online all day too and get the same attitude. But a lot of them are like, you're just dumb. You just don't understand scripture. You just don't do this. And that's not a place where that you're not going to get an honest explanation. And most of those folks, I don't think, actually know what they're believing anyway.
I would say that there's a high level of arrogance by that group, honestly.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because Babylon B had this joke one time, was talking about hyper Calvinism, and it gave the 4 points and said the last one is being an insufferable ass.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, it is.
And
Some of them,
really,
some of them, I think, realize that, because they say, "Look, we do a terrible job reaching out to and how we speak to other Christians and how we speak to non-Christians. We are so condescending that it hurts our own evangelism."
What is their gospel message to the Christian that's flailing? uh, you might be picked, but otherwise you'll be in heaven, be in hell. And I'm sorry if you wind up there. What
Yeah.
is that? Is that the good news? The good news is that we can all believe. You know, I don't
Yeah.
know.
I, I
It's
and
a
I don't
free.
want this to turn into a Calvinist bashing session, but this was, I thought that it was interesting that it does kind of poke a hole in that in that viewpoint. And I don't want to say, I just think they're wrong.
Well,
I
but
think
I
that they
think though
still
that I think that you brought up at a good time because this chapter really deals with it. If you, like you said,
yeah.
it deals with Satan saying that, we're just, you hardened my heart like Pharaoh. We had no chance, and God says that's not what, it's He's fair with us, and that
Yeah.
we can be righteous. Our bodies and our being can be righteous by accepting Christ and the sacrifice He's done for us. That's free will. That means that, and that's why this is a battle over free will.
All right. Well, we're at an hour 10. I think that we've gotten it. This was a really good stream, Doc. This was
Okay.
I like, I'm always worried when we're putting what do you call it?
So,
Frames up, slides up, that you can lose the audience. But I think that the way that, one, Job is a very compelling book. It's a one that a lot of people think about, and a lot of people, like I said, when I'm struggling, if there's stuff going on in my life, and I've had to deal with it over the past 9 months or the past year and a half, especially with some of the things that have gone on in my life that have been difficult. And it's easy for people to go, why do bad things happen? It's not, don't focus on why do bad things happen to me. Focus on how do I deal with it? How do I react to it? And what do I do when it happens? Am I going to just lay down and quit? Or am I going to run to God? Am I going to put faith in Him that there's some purpose to the end of it, and the fact that that I'm still here. And like I said, it's a great book that a lot of people really really put a lot of value in, as one should. It's the Bible, it's scripture. But between that, I think you've done a great job kind of illustrating some really key points that we're going to be going over the next couple of weeks, or the next few weeks, as we read through this, because Job can be a little bit of a slog as well, because it's a lot of monologues. It's a lot, like entire chapters of somebody just talking.
well, and the problem is a lot of the stuff seems accurate in some sense, but you have to know that the guys that are saying it are not correct, and you have to know what they're driving at, and they're all driving based on this one, these 2 or 3 verses right here is what they are ultimately going after.
And why is that? Because it's what they're saying is relatable. But guess what? So is temptation. So is sin. It's relatable because a lot of us fall
Well,
to sin for the same reasons, or
well,
for similar causes.
but the reason is that uh, Satan took a stab at God twice, and Job passed the first 2 tests. All he could do is get useful idiots to try to argue his point after that, and hope that he would win. And they gave it a try at it, but they couldn't win. Job beat them on all points, and then God corrected everybody at the end. So that's what's amazing about this. There's no other chapter in the Bible that actually tells you what Satan's appeal to God is.
Yeah.
I mean, we just look at him as this fallen guy, and he's gonna go down in flames in the end. But we don't know, his appeal is exactly what a human being would make. I mean, if you were blamed for something, you're gonna pass it on. What did that? Adam said, "It's this woman you gave me."
It was a woman. Yeah. Or Sarah,
So,
when she's having she's having all these problems with Hagar. Well,
yeah,
this is
yeah,
all your fault, Abraham. Wait
yeah,
a
yeah.
minute.
I know. No. So anyway,
It,
so that's I think
it's
it's a
it
remarkable book, and also think about this. This is the very first book, in my opinion, and you have all the angels showing up, and then what's at the very end of the Bible,
no.
Revelation.
Oh yeah,
You
I
have
was
the,
supposed
you
to.
have the angels showing up again. Mankind is in between the angelic conflict. The angelic conflict is really what it's about, and we're part of it. It's not the other way around. We're a subset of the history of angels and their fight that's going on, and we're here to solve the fight. And angels get to have their shot at us to prove that they're right, and God uses us to prove they're wrong.
Yeah, I
So
mean, it's something I like about Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. I know it's not really scriptural. But I like how it kind of tries to visualize what goes on the higher plane, as it were. You know that.
it's a very heady book.
Yeah,
And the guy
I
says it's better rule in heaven
better the rule in heaven, better rule in hell and serve in heaven. You
yeah,
know,
that's a
it's
pretty scary thing.
yeah. I mean, but to me, it's almost like kind of like Aesop's fables or something like, or Jesus's
No,
parables, where
it's
when
very
you take
heady.
a story and you're like, okay, now I have a better idea of like the more esoteric
Yeah.
things that are going on. We
This
know what goes on
this
is
book would be real. It would really be worth taking Job and Paradise Lost and seeing what
what.
connections you can make between the two.
Yeah.
I might do that if I live long enough.
All right. Well, like I said, the chat's been great, responding well to what you're saying. I like I said, I really like what you've done here, but I think it's and if there's anything, if there's any other books that you really want uh to cover like this, by all means, reach out to me. We can do this again, because I think that this going through it like this has been been very good, and I think it's a good way to get us ready to start really considering what we're gonna be reading about in the next, like I said, over the next couple of weeks.
Well, maybe in the future I could do up a talk on the kingdom, the coming kingdom. It's really a review of Andy Woods, he's the president of Chafer University
Hmm.
Seminary. And when you understand the kingdom of God and what it means and what context it means, it clarifies all your eschatology. It's amazing. It makes sense out of all the gospels, because you see Jesus saying that the kingdom of God is here. What does that mean exactly? When
Yeah.
you understand all of that, it really clarifies things. But maybe I could do something up like that
Oh
later.
yeah, definitely. I mean, we could bring. I mean, yeah, because especially as we move through this, because obviously there is an end to the Bible too. Eventually, I'm going to be looking for other things to talk about, and I really want to get into, once we get to that point, I really want to get to the other facets of different doctrines and belief systems and whatnot within Christianity. I've got a guy who's a dispensationalist which I know absolutely zero about, to come on and talk about dispensationalism. And like I said, having Calvinists come on, having Lutherans and different denominations come on and say, hey, look, this is our pitch. This is why we think this is correct.
Well, actually, I'm a dispensationalist as well.
Okay.
And the critics of dispensationalism want to say that this occurred because of a guy named Darby, but you can find in the early church fathers that they believed the things of dispensationalists. So
They seem to get a lot of heat, but I don't know enough about it to really even understand the criticisms of it. So, like I said, I'm gonna bring him on to really, because he's a good Twitter presence, and he's the one that everybody tolerates, because he does it. But I think he seems like he does a good job answering for himself. But again, I don't know enough about it, and we need to get him on, or get him on to kind of say, hey, look, if you see somebody reference this is what it means.
yeah.
Veritax is asking, is there some place we can follow you? Do you
Well,
have a social media, or I mean, you've
yeah,
got.
actually, are you looking for science? Because I write a lot about how evolution is falling apart these days. I mean, if you're interested in that, um, then I can give you a place to go. But I don't really do a lot of theological stuff.
Okay. Well, send that to me and I'll put it in Discord. Veritax, he's got when we talked about, I think it was before you got into the stream. He wrote about a 40-page kind of, I don't want to say story because it's real. He's talking about, Doc's talking about, kind of his experience. That's what I guess it is. A chronicling of his experience with Job as he's as he's getting older and maturing and going through things, um, and his thoughts on the overall perspective more than what we could possibly cover in one night. And so he's got that on a blog spot. I'm going to share that link in the Discord, and you can read that. It like I said, he's put his thoughts together pretty well, and it's compelling enough read that I think that some of you guys, especially after tonight, would really enjoy that.
You
Is that
you can give them the name of my Facebook group, but again,
okay?
it has to do with science, and it's called Darwin, like in Charles Darwin, and Lamarck, Lamarck. Lamarck was another biologist that lived before Darwin, but Darwin versus Lamarck, and I post a lot of blogs on there, and they're all about how things are changing rapidly recently, and I mean evolution is just completely blown apart recently. It's
Well,
amazing.
you seem to write. I looked at this because you sent me the blog spot, and it seems like you do write articles on here
Yeah.
pretty consistently. Like I see one from July, a few in July actually, where you're talking about stuff.
Well,
So
I
that's
was telling you what's happening. I've read thousands of articles on science,
mhm.
and I knew all this stuff, but my writing abilities were terrible. But I can take this stuff and stick it into Google Bard, and it will flush out my writing style so that I can just hammer out stuff real quick, and it's great. Of course, I know whether something's wrong in it or not. So, um, um, AI is just amazing, and you can ask a lot of questions. For instance, you can go in Google Bard and say, "What are 10 points about Calvinism that's not theological?" And it'll
Right.
give you 10 points. It's amazing. Now, some of them are going to be wrong.
10 points is more than 5 points.
Yeah,
Checkmate, Calvinists.
that's right. 5 points.
So, all right. Well, I'll put the link for that particular article, and then I'll put the blog spot because it looks like if you're looking for more that he's writing, that kind of how because it's Vaughn's apologetics is what you've titled it, and it's
Okay.
just there's some
No,
scientific stuff that
that's
they might.
well, that's a group that I have, a Facebook group, and it's more apologetics. It's not just Darwinism and everything.
No, but
So
it looks like it's stuff that these guys in the chat are interested in. So
yeah, it is. It's got some remarkable articles in there.
okay. All right. Well, with that said, we're gonna close out for the evening. It's been a long
All
day
right.
for me, guys. I've had my kids' first day of school was today for both of them. So I got dropped them off. I was driving all over creation, and then but back in time to pick them up from school, and then my son had his first soccer practice. I was getting ready for this, so it's just been it's been a very eventful day, and I'm a little bit wore out.
All
But
right. All right. Well, you
Doc,
take care then. We'll
You've
see
been
you
a
next.
great guest, and again, reach out again, and when you've got something you want to talk about, and we'll make time for it. Because,
Okay.
like I said, you do a pretty good job, kind of um, putting it all together, So, and
All right.
chat, you guys have a very good night. Let me say, I say good night to all the folks: Mr. Nernath, Veritax, Matt Felty. Who else is in here? Emmanuel Osorio, Figs, Alias. We had a dozen people in here all at one point. Alex Moore, Jab Slant, and Dresden. All you guys in the chat, thanks for your comments. Thanks for giving Doc the attention here. I think that he so richly deserves. I think he brought up some great points worth considering. We're going to send that. Like I said, we're going to share some stuff in the Discord if you're interested. All you guys I know are in there. Everybody who's tuning in who wasn't part of the chat, I'm glad that you got something out of this. Please like and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy this content. I definitely pay attention to what I'm getting the most likes and the most interaction with, and guests like this are what I really enjoy. Why I really enjoy pulling people in and having them discuss, because it's not just me running my mouth. And to everybody who's playing this on replay, I hope to catch you live sometime. So in the meantime, everybody, have a good night and God bless.